Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Juliet from Jill's Closet. Thank you all for tuning in and thank you for the massive love and support you guys have been showing to my channel. On today's video, I'll be showing you how I made this waistcoat with princess darts and buttons. Do well to watch to the end of this video because you'll be having so much to learn. I'll be working with 1 yard of fabric for this waistcoat, and I've gone ahead to divide the fabric into two and got one part for my front piece. So the length that we're working with is 22.5 inches. That is how much fabric I have. And the first thing I'll do is to mark out my starting point, just 1 inch below the beginning of the material. From the front part of this fabric, I went in by 2 inches. So this will serve as the base for your buttons. So 1.5 inches is actually what we need for this base, then 0.5 inches allowance for sewing. So that is why I went in by 2 inches. I'll just go ahead and draw out the points, then rule out the line. These lines that we've drawn out will serve our starting point. So from that line, I'm going to be getting my shoulder measurement. My shoulder measurement is 15 inches. When divided by 2 is 7.5 inches. So I've marked out 7.5 inches, and I went ahead to get my bust point, which is 10 inches, my under bust, which is 13.5 inches, my waistline, which is 16.5 inches, and the full length, which is 20 inches. I'll just go ahead to mark all these points out across the fabric, then rule it out. Using this pattern to rule it's actually easy and accurate, so you can go ahead to use this pattern. I really had a struggle using this chalk that I had, so my apologies if it's not coming out very clear. So running it down, I have a starting point, my bust point, my under bust, my waistline, and my full length. So these are the points that we're working with. From this starting point, I went down by 1 inch, which will serve as our shoulder slope. Then from that 1 inch mark, I got my armhole measurement. My armhole measurement is my bust point divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. So I marked it out. It was almost 8 inches. I went ahead to mark it out. Then I drew my shoulder measurement across, which is 7.5 inches. So I drew it down from the top to meet the armhole point that I have, where my armhole will stop. This new point will also serve as your chest line, so you can go ahead to extend it as well. So I just extended mine to the back because I'll just be needing it for my armhole. So remember I told you that our measurements are starting from this line that we have, so it's just like having a zipper allowance, but in this case it's a button allowance. From there, I marked out the width of my neck, which is 3 inches. Then I also marked out the depth, so the depth is going to be 7 inches. You can as well make yours longer or shorter depending on the extent of exposure you would want. I'll just go ahead and connect these 2 points together. So please, when you're connecting yours, you make sure that the lower part of your V-neck touches the 7 inches point outside the space for your button. So it shouldn't cross into the space. Mine was a mistake, which I later corrected. So from the neckline that we have, I went ahead to connect my shoulder slope. I went ahead to take my other measurements. On my chest line, I took my bust measurement. My bust measurement is 38 inches, and when divided by 4 is 9.5 inches. You can as well add 0.5 inches to your measurements if you don't want your jacket to be very tight. On the line that we have for our armhole, you're going to divide it by 2 to get the midpoint. Then from that midpoint, you go in by 0.5 inch. This will aid you to draw out your armhole curve, just like I'm doing. So just go ahead and do the same thing that I did in this video. On the waistline, I went ahead to measure out my waist measurement, which is 32 inches. When divided by 4 is 8 inches. You can also add your 0.5 inch to make it freer. On the full length line, you're going to measure your upper hip measurement and divide by 4. So mine was about 40 inches. When divided by 4, I got 10 inches. Then I'll just go ahead and join these points that I have with my rule. I moved over to work on my darts for this jacket, and the dart we'll be using is a princess dart. To mark out this dart, I'll be using my nipple to nipple measurement, which is 8 inches, and when divided by 2 is 4 inches. But because we're marking this directly on the fabric, we'll be making use of 4.5 inches. So I started from the bust point down to the full length of this dress. I'll go ahead and mark it out. On the under bust line, I'll be going out by 0.5 inch on both sides of the dart line. Then on the full length line, I'll be going up from that full length line by 2 inches. Then I'll just go ahead and connect those 2 points together. Then also from our bust point, we connect it to meet with these two lines on our under bust. You're going to find the midpoint of the armhole that you have and connect it from there to the bust point in a curve-like manner. So if you have a curve rule, you can as well use it for this. On your armhole, you're going to be going out by half an inch on both sides of our curved line so that you connect it from that point to meet the bust point, just like I'm doing. From the curved line that we have, the one downwards, you'll be extending it by 1.5 inches to 2 inches, then connecting it down to the chest line. This will serve to replace any shortage that we're going to have when we are sewing our princess dart. I'll go ahead to add 3 inches allowance on all the sides of my measurement. This is because we need enough allowance since we are cutting this directly on the fabric. I'll also add ½ inch allowance around the armhole, the shoulder and the neckline that we have. For the armhole allowance, you just add it across as seen in the video, leaving out that space in the middle. I'm done with the front piece, so I'll just go ahead and cut it out, but I won't be touching the space that I have at the bottom part of this fabric since we'll be using it to cut out that shape that we have at the bottom part of our waistcoat. At this point, just closely watch what I'm doing to see how you go about cutting out your princess dart. So from the armhole, we are basically cutting out from the first curved line that we have and the second curved line that we have, leaving out the middle part. So this is what it should look like. Moving on to the back, you're going to place your remaining fabric on fold, and the folded end that has no opening should be on your center back. So just like we did from the front, we'll go ahead to mark out our starting point. Then from there, we'll take other measurements. My shoulder measurement is 15 inches when divided by 7.5 inches. I went ahead to mark it out. Marked out my bust measure point, which is 10 inches, my waistline 16.5, and my full length 20 inches. From that starting point, I came down by 1 inch to form my shoulder slope. And from that 1 inch line, I went down to get my armhole measurement, which is my bust measurement divided by 6 inches plus 1.5 inches. Then I'll go ahead to measure out my shoulder measurement down to meet that armhole line that we have. After which I marked out all the points that I measured out, which is my bust point, my waistline, and my full length measurement. So basically, I'm replicating all that I have on my front piece on this back piece with little difference. The neck width of the back will be 3 inches, just like that of the front. Then the neck depth is 1 inch, or you can use 1.5 inches. So I'll just go ahead and connect these 2 points that I have together and form out my neck curve. From the neckline, I'll draw a line to meet my shoulder slope. To get my armhole curve, I'll be taking my bust measurement on the chest line, which is 38 inches, and when divided by 4 is 9.5 inches. I marked out 9.5 inches on the side, then went ahead to form my armhole curve from the shoulder slope to meet the bust measurement. I also added 2 inches allowance by the side. Then for my waist measurement, it's 32, and when divided by 4, we have 8 inches. I measured out 8 inches and added 2 inches allowance by the side. I marked out the full length, which is at 20 inches. Then I'll go ahead to measure out my upper hip measurement on this line, which is about 40 inches. And when divided by 4, I have 10 inches. I marked out 10 inches plus 2 inches allowance. Then I went ahead to connect these points that I have together. So for the back piece dart, I'll be doing the same thing I did in the front. I'll measure out 4.5 inches into the fabric, then roll it out. This is from my bust point to my full length line. Then from the waistline, I'll be going in by ½ an inch on both sides of our dart line. Then I'll connect these points together from the bust point to the waistline and from the waistline down to the full length. I'll be adding ½ inch allowance around the neck, the shoulder part, and the armhole. After which we'll go ahead and cut this pattern out. We won't be cutting out the darts on the back piece, we'll be sewing it together on the fabric. I also added ½ inch on the down part of our back pattern for our sewing allowance. Moving on to the sewing part, I'll go ahead to cut out lining pieces for both the front and back piece. You can as well go ahead and iron pepper stay to this fabric to make it stronger. I opened up the front piece and matched the right sides together. So I'll just start by joining one part of my princess dart with ½ inch. Then I'll do the same for the other parts of the front piece. Then after then, I'll go ahead and notch these sides that I have after stitching it down. I've also done the same thing for the back piece. I lined them together and stitched it down with ½ inch. To work on the back piece, we're going to open it up and transfer the darts that we have on this side to the other side of the back piece. So basically, you just find the middle part of this back piece, and using that middle line, you're going to transfer all the lines and darts that you have on this side to the other side. So I just went ahead to extend my lines that I have, just like we did when we were measuring this out. Then I connected it together and marked out ½ inch on both sides of my waistline, then connected my darts together. I'll take this to my sewing machine and sew the darts out. After that, I'll just go ahead and align the front piece and the back piece together so that I can sew up the shoulder. Remember, our front piece is open because we'll be adding buttons to the front. I'll be joining the shoulders with ½ inch on both sides. After joining the shoulders, I also went ahead to close up that part that we had 2 inches for our button space, so that I'll be able to align the front piece and the back piece together and shape it out. Reshaping your dress before you sew the sides down is very important once you're not using a pattern paper to draft out your clothes. So from this midpoint that we have in our front piece, I'm going to be marking out my measurements. My bust measurement is 38 inches, when divided by 2 is 19 inches. So from that midpoint, I'll just be marking out 9½ inches on both sides to get 19 inches. I'll be doing the same thing for the waist. My waist measurement is 32 inches, when divided by 2, because this fabric is no longer on 4 folds, it's on 2 folds. So 32 divided by 2 inches is 16. So from that middle point that I have, I'll go ahead to mark out 8 inches on both sides of the middle point. Then at the full length, I went ahead to mark out 20 inches. Then I'll connect these points together on both sides. I'll pin this down, then take it to my machine and shape it out. And this is what it looks like after sewing it down. For my armhole, I'll be working on it and making little adjustments due to the excesses that I had at the upper part of this armhole. This is as a result of insufficient allowance on the down part of the armhole. So I just had to reshape one side of this armhole, then turned it over and used it to cut out the other part of the armhole. I went ahead to cut out the excesses on both sides, leaving just 1 inch for the allowance. I've gone ahead to do the same things that I've done so far on my main fabric to my lining pieces, since we are going to be using this to turn out the main fabric. You need these lining pieces to look exactly like the main fabric. I'll be picking the center part of my front piece, then turning it over to the side so that the 2 front sides will face each other and the 2 back sides will also face each other. This is to work on the down part of our front piece, which you can see is longer than the back piece. From the full length line of my front piece, I went out by 2 inches, and from that midline that we have just before the bottom base, I went in by 2 inches also. I'll be connecting these points that I have together to form that pattern we have in our front jacket. From the side allowance that matches with the length that we have at our back piece, I'll connect it down to this point, and from this point back to the bottom base. So look carefully and follow what I did, then you connect it with your rule. Then just go ahead and cut out that shape from the side allowance where the front piece and the back piece meet each other. I've laid out my lining piece just the same way I laid out the main fabric, and I'll go ahead to trace out what I have on the main fabric to the lining piece. Once I was done tracing this out, I went ahead to cut it out just like I did for the front piece. I also trimmed the back of this lining a little bit. The next step we're working on is to join the main fabric to the lining piece. So we'll be opening up that part we have for our bottom base. We'll do the same thing on the back piece. Open it up, then spread it out and align the lining piece with the main fabric, right side facing the right side. So the right side of the main fabric is facing the right side of the lining pieces. Then you just hold it together, and with the aid of an office pin, you're going to pin this down to be able to sew it on the machine with your 1/2 inches allowance. This is what it looks like after sewing the sides all round. At the allowance on one side of the lining, we're going to be opening up a small space. This space will help us turn this jacket to the right side, since all the angles of this jacket are closed up. From that space that you have, you just put your hand inside the jacket, then turn out everything to the right side. You can go ahead and use your scissors to point out all the angles that you have so that they will come out very fine. This is what I have after doing so. So the next thing is just to go to my iron and give it a good press. I'm done ironing, and as you can see, the jacket looks flattened and very nice. At the neckline, I went ahead to sew it down so that it remains flattened and the stitches will not be seen from the main fabric. I have a different video where I've taken time to show how to sew down a neckline. The link will be on your screen and on the description box. For the armhole, we are going to be sewing it down in such a way that the stitches won't be seen from the outside, just like the rest of the jacket. So you hold down 1/2 inch of the main fabric and the lining inwards, just the way you want it to appear on the outside. Then from that space that we have, you go and pick up that 1/2 inch that you folded inwards. Holding this 1/2 inch, you go ahead and turn out the armhole completely and arrange it properly so that the lining and the main fabric aligns with each other. Then you go ahead and sew this down on your machine with 1/2 inch all around the armhole. This is what it should look like when you're done. As you can see, it came out nicely sewn, no rough edges. So for the sake of clarity, we're going to be running this down once more, but with a different pattern. So from any point of your armhole, it can be the upper part or the lower part, preferably the lower part, you're going to be folding it in by 1/2 inch, folding the lining and also folding the main fabric by 1/2 inch, then align it together. From the remaining opening of this armhole, you can go ahead and bring out what you've aligned together, that's 1/2 inch that you are holding down. Then go ahead and pin this down. So I pinned mine down with 3 pins so that when I turn this from the inside, I will always locate these 3 pins. After that, from the space that I have on one side of this jacket, I'm going to put my hand across to the other armhole, then search for the pins that I have. Once you find this pin, you go ahead and take it to your sewing machine and sew down with 1/2 inch, just the way you've aligned the lining piece and the main fabric together. Then do the same thing all across the armhole. With that, we are done working on the 2 armholes, and as you can see, our jacket really looks so neat from the inside. For the space that we had on one side of this jacket, go ahead to hold it together, then sew it down on your sewing machine with a little stitch, or you can hand stitch it. Finally, I closed this up, arranged the front piece and aligned the button spaces, and I went ahead to mark out the number of buttonholes that I'll be needing. So the number of buttonholes will depend on how long the front of your jacket is. And the spaces between each buttonholes can be 3 inches, more or less, depending on your preference. Take this to a machine that can run a buttonhole stitches and form your buttonhole. Then add your buttons to the other side. And with that, we've come to the end of this tutorial. The video on the Palazzo Trousers that I will pair with this waistcoat will be up next on my channel, because I wouldn't want this video to be too lengthy. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and valuable. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel for more of these beautiful videos.